The air in Port Royal hung thick with the smell of salt, rum, and the sweat of men who lived and died by the sea. Captain Elias Thorne, a man whose reputation was as sharp as the cutlass he wore, stood on the docks, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He was the kind of pirate who commanded respect not with brute force, but with a quiet, calculated intensity. His crew, a motley but loyal band, was gathered around him, their faces weathered by sun and storms. Elias's ship, the Sea Serpent, was a sleek schooner, its sails a canvas of patched history. They had just returned from a successful raid, their hold heavy with Spanish gold. But the captain's mind was not on the treasure. A weight, a memory he had tried to bury with every mile of ocean, had resurfaced. It was 10 years ago, on this very island, that he had met her. The governor's daughter, Elara. She was a fiery, spirited girl, a stark contrast to the stifling gowns and polite society she was forced to endure. Elias, then just a young, ambitious sailor, had been captivated. Their meeting was a fleeting, forbidden moment, a secret kiss in a moonlit garden, a whispered promise of a life they could never have. He had left, with a part of his soul clinging to that night, a memory he had carried through years of plunder and peril. Now, a decade later, a new kind of peril had found him. A small, ragged boy, no older than 10, scrambled onto the docks and ran to Elias, breathless. "Captain, Captain Thorne," the boy panted, his eyes wide with fear. "They've taken her, the governor's ship, the Protector. It was ambushed. They say a rival pirate, the Vulture, took his daughter." A cold knot twisted in Elias's stomach. The Vulture, a name synonymous with cruelty and greed. He was a brute who cared nothing for honor, only for profit. The thought of Elara in his hands sent a wave of icy fury through Elias. He had to act, and he had to act fast. "Matey," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Ready the Serpent. We sail with the tide." His first mate, a towering man named Silas, stepped forward. "Captain, we just returned. The men need rest, and the Vulture, he's a monster." "Then we must be demons," Elias retorted, his eyes holding a fire Silas had not seen in years. "I'm not asking you to follow me, Silas. I'm telling you. We're going after her." The crew, seeing the grim determination in their captain's face, didn't argue. They knew that when Elias Thorne set his mind to something, not even the devil himself could stop him. As the Sea Serpent cut through the choppy waters of the Caribbean, Elias stood at the helm, the wind whipping his long coat. The memory of that night with Elara was a vivid torment, a ghost of what could have been. He had promised her he would return, a foolish vow from a young man who had no idea of the harsh realities of the sea. Now he had a chance to fulfill that promise, to save her from a fate worse than death. The mission was no longer about gold, or glory, or revenge. It was personal. It was a race against time and a ruthless enemy, all for the ghost of a kiss and a girl he couldn't forget. The chase was a grueling affair, a dance of sails and strategy across the open sea. Elias, using his superior knowledge of the local currents and hidden coves, was slowly gaining on the Vulture's ship, the Harpy. The weather was relentless, with tropical storms lashing the vessels, testing the resolve of every man on board. The Sea Serpent's crew worked tirelessly, their faces grimy with salt and grime, but their spirits were high. They trusted their captain implicitly. On the other side of the sea, aboard the Harpy, Elara was held captive. She was no longer the naive girl from the governor's manor. The past 10 years had forged her into a woman of resilience and quiet strength. She had heard stories of the Vulture's cruelty, and she knew she had to be careful. Her father's capture had shaken the foundation of her world, but she refused to be a helpless victim. The Vulture, a man whose face was a patchwork of scars and whose voice was a rasping threat, brought her before him in his cabin. He planned to ransom her to the governor, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a predatory interest that made Elara's skin crawl. "The governor's daughter, eh?" he sneered, circling her like a shark. "I hear you were quite the prize in your youth. "My worth is more than a ransom, Vulture," Elara replied, her voice steady despite her fear. "You underestimate me, and you overestimate your father's love for you," the Vulture said with a cruel laugh. "He'll pay for your life, then he'll be rid of you. You're just a pawn in a game of power." Just as the Vulture was about to grab her, a loud cheer erupted from the deck. A lookout yelled, "The sea serpent! Captain Thorne is here!" The Vulture's face contorted in a mask of fury. He knew of Elias Thorne, a pirate who played by a different set of rules, one with a reputation for both ferocity and an unusual sense of honor. He dragged Elara back to the cabin, locking the door. "You're coming with me," he growled. "We will see how much he is willing to pay for you now." On the deck of the Sea Serpent, Elias watched the Harpy with a grim focus. The two ships were now side by side, their cannons trained on each other. The air crackled with tension. Elias grabbed a megaphone, his voice carrying over the crashing waves. "Vulture, release the girl, and you might live to see another sunrise." The Vulture appeared on his deck, pulling a struggling Elara to his side. He held a knife to her throat, a sickening smirk on his face. "Come and get her, Thorne," he yelled, "or watch her die." Elara's eyes, wide with a mixture of terror and defiance, met Elias's across the churning sea. In that moment, a decade of distance dissolved. She saw not just the pirate captain, but the boy from the garden, and as she looked at his face, she whispered a name only they would know, a forgotten pet name from a secret, innocent past. "Elias," she called out, her voice barely a whisper against the wind, but he heard it. It was the confirmation he needed. This was her, the girl he had been searching for. The Vulture's smirk widened. He thought he had the upper hand, but he had just made his fatal mistake. Elias's jaw tightened. He signaled to Silas and his crew. They knew the plan. It was time for a fight. The cannons roared, and the battle for Elara's freedom began. The air was thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the metallic tang of blood. The deck of the Harpy was a brutal stage, littered with splintered wood and the bodies of fallen men. Cannon fire tore through the air, but the true battle was a desperate close-quarters struggle. The crews of the Sea Serpent and the Harpy clashed in a cacophony of steel, their cries of rage and pain swallowed by the roar of the sea. Elias, his cutlass a blur of motion, moved with a controlled fury that surprised even his own men. He was no longer just a captain, he was a force of nature, cutting a precise and deadly path toward the Vulture's cabin. Every swing of his blade was purposeful, every parry a calculated move to get him closer to his goal. The singular focus in his eyes was a testament to the years he had spent building his reputation. A reputation that now rested on a single, desperate rescue. He found the Vulture inside his cabin, a small, dark space filled with the pirate's ill-gotten gains. The Vulture, a brute of a man with a face scarred by a life of violence, held Elara in a vice-like grip. His movements were brutal, his strikes fueled by a savage rage born from the unexpected defiance of a woman he saw as nothing more than a bargaining chip. But Elias was faster, his movements precise and purposeful, fueled by a decade of regret and a glimmer of hope. He fought not with anger, but with a cold, clear focus that gave him an edge. The fight raged on, a grim dance between two opposing ideologies of piracy. The Vulture, a symbol of brute force and insatiable greed, fought without honor. Elias, a man who, despite his lawless life, clung to a sliver of honor and a profound sense of purpose, fought to protect what was truly priceless. As their swords locked, Elias pushed the Vulture against the wall, his eyes fixed on Elara. "Do you know my voice?" Elara suddenly asked, her voice clear and strong despite the danger, the question seemingly out of place in the middle of a life-or-death duel. Was meant for Elias alone. "I was the pirate's daughter you once kissed." The vulture was momentarily confused by the strange phrase, but Elias's eyes widened with understanding. The code phrase, the secret nickname from a night long ago. This wasn't a distraction, it was a message. It was a reaffirmation of their past and a promise of their future, a beacon of hope in the middle of a brutal fight. With a sudden burst of strength, Elias disarmed the vulture, sending his cutlass skittering across the floor. He didn't kill him. Instead, he simply knocked him unconscious with a swift, brutal blow to the head, a pirate's mercy that was more about justice than revenge. With the vulture defeated, he turned his full attention to Elara. "Elara," he said, his voice husky with emotion. He reached out, his calloused hands gently cupping her face. The rough skin of his palms was a stark contrast to her soft cheeks, but she leaned into his touch. "I never forgot you. I came back for you." A single tear escaped her eye and traced a path down her cheek. "I knew you would," she whispered, her voice trembling, "even after all this time." With the vulture and his crew defeated and the harpy secured, Elias helped Elara onto the deck of the Sea Serpent. As the ship sailed away from the wreckage, they stood together at the bow, the sea breeze a cool balm on their faces. The battle was over, but a new chapter was just beginning. Their reunion was a delicate mixture of old memories and new realities. Elias told her of his life at sea, of the man he had been forced to become to survive. He spoke of storms and raids, of loyalty and betrayal, a world away from the gilded cage she had known. Elara in turn shared her story, of a decade spent longing for a life she was not allowed to have. She spoke of the stifling expectations of her father and the loneliness of a life without passion. They were different people, shaped by different worlds, but the connection between them was undeniable. The kiss in the garden had been a seed, and now, after a decade, it had finally blossomed. Back in Port Royal, Elias delivered Elara safely to her father, who, in a rare moment of genuine gratitude, offered Elias a full pardon for his crimes. But Elias, a pirate at heart, politely declined. His home was the sea, and his life was with his crew. To accept a pardon would mean giving up the life that had brought him back to her. As he prepared to set sail again, Elara stood on the docks, watching him with a heart full of both love and longing. "Where will you go?" she asked, her voice a soft ache in the salty air. "Wherever the wind takes me," he replied with a smile, a spark of adventure in his eyes. "But no matter where I am, I will always find my way back to you." She smiled back, a genuine, joyful smile that lit up her face. "Then I will wait for you," she said. "The sea brought you back to me once. It will bring you back again." Elias boarded the Sea Serpent, and with a final wave, the ship sailed out into the vast blue expanse. He was a pirate, a man of the sea, but now he had something to fight for, something to return to. The kiss in the garden was no longer a ghost, it was a promise, and he knew he would fulfill it, time and time again. And that's the end of our story. If you enjoyed this tale of romance and adventure on the high seas, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more exciting stories.